And now it's time for Talking Trade, sponsored by Michael Best Strategies and MMAC's World Trade Association.
Welcome to Talking Trade. I'm Sandi Siegel, president of MEJ.
And I'm Katie Henry, executive director of the MMAC World Trade Association. This morning, we're really excited to have Jennifer Jin with us as our guest. Jen is the Senior Counsel, Global Compliance Contract Litigation at Briggs Stratton. Prior to that, Jen was the Chief Legal Officer at WEDC. And before that, you were the International Trade Law Attorney at Husch Blackwell. So Jen, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. It's nice to see you again, Jen. We've had the pleasure of crossing paths in Wisconsin trade and programs, and working with you in your attorney roles in various places. So I'm really interested in reconnecting. A lot of focus these days on sanctions and export controls, and they appear to be getting more relevant as we're dealing with some large economic powers and sanctions, and the risks seem to be getting larger, again, more relevant, significant to exporters and companies. So I think, with the various hats you've worn, you've probably got some real practical advice and experience on how that impacts everybody. So tell us about what some of the best practices are from your perspective in ensuring that businesses are ready to respond to the quickly changing environment in regards to sanctions and export control.
Absolutely. So as we all know, the geopolitical environment over in Russia and the Ukraine has really created a lot of change within the export controls. And it's vital that companies, especially global companies, are able to respond and understand their responsibilities as it relates to some of those changing laws, not just here in the United States, but all across the world. So one of the most important things anytime you're responding to any type of governmental regulatory changes is to really understand the scope of that impact, understanding how it plays into your business. So the key thing to really understand is, for example, in Russia, who is there? Do you have employees there? Do you have suppliers there? Do you have customers, vendors? What is your presence in the areas in the regions that may be impacted by the sanctions or export control? Once you have a sense of that, then really the most important thing is to ensure that you're bringing in the right team. So looking cross-functionally and determining who needs to be part of this rapid response team. So one of the things that we did at Briggs was, once all these export control changes were coming into play, we really brought together a rapid response team. Cross-functionally, we identified individuals in the sales area, individuals within finance, individuals in logistics, all across the board, the global compliance team, the legal team, figuring out who it was that needed to be part of that conversation as to what do we do in response to some of the changes that are happening. So that's one of the key things to really look into when it comes to what to do when things are changing quickly. The other thing to really, really think about is how you're communicating what the response is organizationally, so as well as externally. So part of our response is really to communicate what are we doing in response to the changes that are happening, not just to our internal team, because that's vital that everybody be on the same page as to how we're responding to the changes, the export controls, the sanctions, but also sending out communications. And we drafted separate communications to our suppliers and our customer base. And for our suppliers, we really were soliciting, are you impacted by some of these export control changes? Do you source from Russia? What kind of things are you doing to ensure that you're able to meet your obligations so that we can ensure that our supply chain remains secure and in place? On the customer side, what we really did was we tiered it out. So we identified, the high-risk customers, those that may have presence or impact in Russia or other high-risk areas, and then those that just probably needed a notification. And so we had different communications going out to each of those, the high priority, high risk entities, and then those that just got the general communication, which was, we follow the laws and we expect you to follow the laws for that general communication. On the high risk side of things, we had them sign an export control certificate that basically stated that we recognize that we have these rules and we're going to follow them. And so that was kind of our tiered approach on that end. I think one of the core best practice is to ensure that you have controls in place, not just human controls, but also IT focused controls. So we really worked with our IT team to ensure that we understood how to identify the potential partners that were having Russian presence, and or how we could block transactions with those particular vendors, customers, and banks. So, I think that it's really about communication. It's about understanding how to get the message out to the right folks and how to ensure that you're creating systematic protections within your own company that will protect the company from making inadvertent errors.
John, do you have any recommendations for blind spots that might take a company by surprise as it relates to dealing with export controls?
Absolutely. So I think one of the big things that companies may not be thinking through would be when you're talking about exports, in some ways, payments that go to different countries could be considered an export, right? So your payments to your suppliers, to your vendors, to even like refunds to your customers, I think it's vital, especially with all of the different sanctions that are going on with regards to banks and entities, to ensure that you know how those payments are being processed, right? So one of the key things to think about, especially on the financial side, is there are a number of different banks that have been blocked by OFAC. And in addition to understanding your bank is okay and your customer's bank is okay, to understand that banks often use intermediaries. So they often have to transfer banks, kind of like a post office, right? You can't get it straight there, you have to go through a path. So if any of the intermediaries on the path are sanctioned, then you could inadvertently violate OFAC requirements. And so it's vital that you understand and make it clear to your business partners, wherever they may be, because they may not be located in Russia or the Ukraine or wherever, but they may have a bank that has that type of connection, or it may be sanctioned. So understanding that is critical. Also, I think that this is something that you all are very aware of, but just what's the supply chain, and making sure that you understand not only where your products are coming from directly, but where your products are coming from along the chain. So where are the materials coming from? Are the materials going to be sourced from places or people or entities that are sanctioned? On the other end of it, with regards to customers, who are they selling to? And oftentimes it's really important, especially as compliance professionals, to really build out the relationship with your partners, your internal partners, your sales folks, your logistics folks. They have that visibility, and they often have those conversations with their customers or with their vendors where they understand, we sell it to you and then you sell it on to certain things for uses for certain entities in certain countries. So just making sure that they're keyed in, especially in this really sensitive time, that we cannot sell to certain places, we cannot sell for certain functions, and really making sure that they are acting as your first line of defense and highlighting potential problems as they may see it. And I often tell my partners internally that you are the experts in your area. So if you see a red flag. And so anytime there's a red flag, come to us and we will work with you. We're not going to say, we're not the Department of No. We want to figure out what we can do and if it's possible. And if it's not, then we protected the organization from making an error that could potentially be critical.
Absolutely. Well, you bring up a great point, and it's something I've certainly seen over the years that the compliance has been siloed to the compliance team, and it's so important to have everyone in the company have the awareness, because everybody has, some exposure and creates a liability, and has information that can be vital to managing the risk. So that is such a huge part of raising the awareness internally. You're going to be presenting, Katie's going to tell us a little bit more about that, and that's certainly a great way to try to stay informed. Certainly a lot of smaller companies don't have the pleasure of having a large trade compliance team such as Briggs, so it's hard to stay updated. Again, some great programs through World Trade. Katie will tell us about yours coming up. Other resources you can recommend for smaller companies trying to stay on top of all this, besides the MED Great newsletter and other information that's out there?
Absolutely. So I guess I think that the best resources for me are some of the blogs and other types of newsletters that are put together, especially when it comes to some of the law firms that are out there. We've got I think Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg does a really nice job of summarizing things. I think Hush Blackwell does a really nice job with the export control and sanctions updates that they put together. I think that Baker McKenzie does a really nice job. I think they really focus a lot on the vlogs, the video blogs. And that's something that typically I'd prefer to do a little bit of reading myself, because I'm old school that way, but it's definitely a different way to reach out to the different folks who like to get that information in different ways. So that is, though I think that the law firms that do a really good job of kind of summarizing the new developments and giving some practical guidance as to how to make things work better.
Right, and it is changing so quickly. So I think all those resources are helpful. Thank you, Jen, for joining us on Talking Trade. Katie, can you give a quick info
Sure.
commercial on upcoming programs? And again, thank you for joining us.
Sure. I just want to quickly mention that we have a Global Business Insight series coming up. It's a 7-week series, takes place every Wednesday between September 21st and October 26th. Jen will be the kickoff session coming up in a few weeks on September 21st. And you'll be talking about compliance, and it's a great way for folks to continue the conversation with experts such as Jen. So thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for
It was a pleasure
coming on
being
today.
here.
It was
Yeah,
great.
thank you so much for having me. And
Old
I look
friends.
forward to, yes, absolutely. Look forward to seeing you all again very soon. And thank you
Great.
for all you do for the trade community and to ensure that Wisconsin's well informed and ready to really be out there and get exporting and really building out the business.
Yes, and hopefully minimizing risk. So
Yes,
100%.
yes, yes.
thanks, Jennifer Jin, and thank you all for joining us on Talking Trade.
You've been listening to Talking Trade, sponsored by Michael Best Strategies and MMAC's World Trade Association.